talk about Suella Braverman, because she has a plan to restrict rough sleepers from using tents. Now, she's unveiled new plans. It'll be a civil offence. She wants to deter charities from giving tents to homeless people. The new laws would mean charities could be fined for doing so if the tents are deemed to be causing a nuisance. Apparently this is going to be in the King's Speech on Tuesday. Now, I have two interests to declare here. The first interest I must declare is that I worked for the former Housing Secretary, James Brokenshire. I was a special advisor at the Department of what was then the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and I advised him on homelessness. I know a lot of people in the homelessness sector. I'm also a board member of a company called Home REIT, which deals with accommodation for homeless people, so I've also got to mention that as well. I want to talk to someone from Crisis, who is the Executive Director of Policy and Social Change. That's Francesca Albanese. Francesca, I'm delighted to have you on the programme. Thanks for your patience there. I'm sure you can appreciate the big issue of what happened the last 24 hours, but apologies for keeping you waiting. What do you make of Suella Braverman's proposal here?
Well, just thank you for having me, and yeah, totally understand the need to talk about everything else that's going on in the wider context at the moment. I mean, I think the main thing to say with the proposal as it is it isn't going to solve the problem. So targeting people living in tents and charities who give out tents, and you know, there is a reason for that at the moment, which is there are no homes, and not only that, there is very limited amounts of emergency accommodation as well. So all it's going to do is push people further away from support, into destitution, potentially exploitation, and be extremely dangerous. I mean, for people who are forced to sleep rough, this is not, you know, it's extremely isolating, it's dangerous. We know that people die on the streets in extreme weather, and this proposal is only going to, you know, push people further away from help, but also at the extreme end cause more fatalities, which are totally preventable. I think
it's almost worse than that. I think I'm against anybody being in a tent, because they should be in bricks and mortar. They should be in proper accommodation. They should be in a proper bed in bricks and mortar, in a flat, or in a hotel, even if it's for a short period of time. And there are so many, as you know, Francesca, of course, far better than I do, there's so many temporary accommodation things that don't work. But there's sort of two sides to this. On one side, I think there is an argument to say that if you give someone a tent, you're sort of sustaining their life on the street in some way. And I get that argument. It's not the argument that many people have, but it is nonetheless an argument. The other side of the argument is that Suella Braverman is essentially blaming you for a problem that her government has failed to solve.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the kind of, I suppose, wider context of why we're in a situation where rough sleeping in England has gone up by 26% in the last year overall, and if you look at London, there was a significant increase in new people sleeping on the streets in figures that were released last week. That's down to failed government policy. So, you know, we don't have enough affordable housing. We're in a situation where rents are soaring, and local housing allowance, which is housing benefit that pays for rents in the private rented sector, has been frozen since 2019 against a backdrop of the cost of living crisis. That's what's pushing people into rough sleeping. But I think the other side of it is the government have a really strong track record on actually tackling the problem of rough sleeping and actually doing something, the interventions that work. So you'll know this from your own experiences of working for the department. You know, we do have interventions like Housing First.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, they have been piloted. You know, we know that they work. That could be expanded and looked at. That's a really positive way.
You're absolutely right, Francesca. There are things we know work. Housing first, putting people in homes first, and then trying to help them solve their problems, because people are, as you know far better than I do, Francesca, people who are living on the streets are often there for lots and lots of different reasons. There's addiction, there's destitution, there's family breakup, there's all sorts of problems. But also, we know there are things that work. We know that there was a 9% reduction under things like the Rough Sleeping Initiative. There are various strategies that have worked very well. Everyone in during the pandemic worked really well. There are things we know that work. But Suella Braverman, to me anyway, and I want to give the government their say actually, maybe we should do that now. Oliver Dowden was asked about this in Sky News this morning. This is what he had to say.
She made those points. I think it's right that we deal with both the factors that drive people onto the streets, and that's why we're dealing with drug and alcohol addiction and so on, over £2 billion. At the same time, we should have an ultimate reserve power as a government to say that people can't have these kind of tent encampments. And I believe that's what she was saying in those remarks.
I mean, do you think Oliver Dowden makes a fair point within that, Francesca, or do you think that perhaps he doesn't?
I'd say no, in the sense that, you know, yes, there are some people living on the streets who do have, you know, substance misuse issues, but that is usually a cause after rough sleeping. You know, we know that lots of people are forced into homelessness and rough sleeping because they have no home and they have no housing and they can't afford it.
I think it's kind of blaming them, actually, and saying these tent... Look, I don't want any tent encampments. I don't want anybody to have to sleep in a tent tonight, especially in the cool weather that's out there. But it is up to councils, it is up to the government to try to solve the problem alongside excellent charities like Crisis. But I just think, I mean, I don't want anybody to have to give out a tent. I don't want anybody to live in a tent. But you're not doing that because you're not doing that out of anything other than compassion, would be my thought.
Yeah, and because there aren't any other options.
Yeah,
so,
well, exactly.
Obviously, most charities are working to get people into homes and housing and accommodation. But if that isn't available, we know that people die on the streets if they are exposed to kind of extreme weather. It's also extremely dangerous. Many people are exposed to violence on the streets, and a tent can be, you know, it's a last minute solution. We don't want that either. But, you know, tackling, you know, saying it's banning tents and, you know, pushing the problem onto individuals themselves, as you say, is not gonna solve the problem.